unheard.
Hello. This is the last one. This is the finale, the last episode of the first very experimental season of Unheard, a podcast that I don't know how, I don't even remember how it came about, but somewhere in the
Yeah.
middle of our work in building an organization, creating learning spaces, we felt that maybe we're not having enough conversations. And Unheard was born from that, from a very faint feeling. And now it is quite surreal to be at this final episode of season one. And I think um, we finally have um, we finally have somebody on this episode who we feel is the I don't know, is the ideal future for humankind, for parenting, for children. And this is quite interesting because I feel that for all of the episodes that we were in, we talked about from a very educator lens, from a very organizational, from people who are running spaces and creating programs and creating opportunities as to, and that includes me. I'm also somebody who's doing that. But we did not yet have a voice from that represented parents, and it gives me so much joy to invite Aditya um to this podcast, um, because that's when things get real, um, and Aditya, you were telling me how it is really after the birth of your child when
Yeah,
this whole flip has happened from
totally.
working at from a very predestined corporate life, and then becoming a fashion management person, and then working at Nike and doing strategy for a big house like that, um, to switching out completely, living in nature, um, opening yourself up to. I like how you said you're an aspirational Mazdoor. This is quite interesting. Rarely a title that people are looking forward to having. Uh,
Yeah,
so welcome, Aditya. It's really a joy. I think this particular episode will have so much meaning to so many people who know that their children are being hurt by the education system. Forget children who know that they have been hurt by
yeah,
by this sort of extractive way of thinking and living, and but are surrounded by everybody else who also knows the same thing, but constantly keeps justifying to each other that no, stay in the system, don't get out,
correct.
it's safe. Um, Aditya, let's start there. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. And before we start, thank you, Abhijit, for having me and sharing our journey, our experience. So really, really humbled and happy to be sharing whatever we can from our little journey, and if that can help spread more awareness and share more options with so many other parents who might be suffering from the traditional mainstream schooling system, or so many other institutionalization that has happened gradually in just something that's so natural and organic in parenting and raising a child. So yeah, please go ahead.
Let's start with this idea of safety, right? At some point, and we'll talk about your child and parenting, and we're slightly delaying that good part.
Sure.
But from your own personal perspective, this switching out from what was always considered safe. Now, what made that happen for you? What made you feel that no, this is not what I want, and I'm going to take a leap of faith, do
Yeah,
something that has fewer people walking that path, and lesser instruction manuals describing how to do this.
totally.
Um, what was that like for you?
So there wasn't any one trigger point that, happened in life and we felt like, okay, we're going to leave and quit everything and, move back to a remote village and mountain and live this crazy life, out of a farm in the middle of nowhere. It was gradual. It was multiple things happening at the same time. So I would go before we became parents. I think one of the trigger points happened when we were living in Bangalore, working, me and my wife, both of us working, our corporate lives. Uh, you know, a couple earning healthy and, just enough to, spend as lavishly as you can for your own selves. It didn't felt complaining at all initially, but something triggered, and we kind of became spiritual and aligned towards, certain way you believe how universe has plans for you. And this is just before we conceived our first child. Things were coming to us, some thoughts and questions were coming to us. Why are we living this way? It started with food. Actually, the first thing was food. Living Bangalore is one of the best cities, one of the best cities to work and live in India, at least. And having a good corporate career, you're spending, eating, living, drinking, having friends and everything. But it felt a little off, and particularly because, you're doing it for the basic necessities to have nice air, water, and food to eat, drink, healthy, non-toxic, non-corrupted, unpoisoned. And it started with food initially, like what are we eating? We were reading a little bit about, food, how the food farming is happening, the introduction of pests and chemicals in the entire food supply chain. That triggered us, and that was where we kind of started taking a little bit charge of our food supply chain. We became more conscious of what we're consuming. So that was the first step. We spent a little bit time while we were still in Bangalore. We traveled very frequently to Auroville, got a little bit more triggering point of views there, meeting, people that we at that point felt were slightly aware about, more, about, how we should be living this life as per us, conscious and aware from our point of view. And that was one of the first trigger point, what are we consuming, what are we eating? Like if we are working so hard, we're getting paid for that hard work. At the end of the day, my water is poison, my air is poison, my food is pretty much poison. It doesn't add up. We cannot be living for this. So that was one major point. And from there, we kind of kept deep diving within our food supplies. And we were still young, and we were probably in like mid 20s, 27, 28 years old, both me and my wife. And we started to question that. And we were still not yet parents. And it was just two of us. We started researching more on food, what we want to eat, what we want to consume. And that kept going on and on and on. We became parents, we got more conscious about it. Then food, beyond the question about food went beyond food. Now it's about also raising a child, like this doesn't feel the right environment to raise a child. And by then we had moved to Singapore. And again, like, well, Singapore is one of the most cosmopolitans of any cosmopolitans in the world. Super advanced, clean, nice, hygienic, access to, all the conveniences of so-called, modern world. But yet it didn't feel right. Like this is too plastic, this is too artificial, this is not how you're supposed to live. And that triggered us furthermore to go beyond food and question, is this where we want to grow old? Is this where we want to raise a child? And that was one of the major points that triggered us this point. Okay, no, we cannot live in this setup. We cannot raise a child in this setup. We cannot eat, drink, and breathe in this setup. We've got to move out and reclaim our lives, reclaim our health, reclaim our food supply chain, reclaim education for a child,
Yeah.
and reimagine all of it. First, reclaim it and reimagine. That was the entire thought process at that point. And then this is how the shift happened from, a typical mainstream job to quitting everything and living this life now.
I think that this is very, very nice. I feel that I've seen two kinds of people, or not two. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it's only two kinds of people, but there's typically two ways in which people have switched out. Um, and your ways sounds so nice that you got introduced to ideas and communities like Oroville and many other places, and that slowly kept adding on to the triggers. I feel that my way of escaping this was so much driven by not having those things. So like not
Yeah.
having these communities and not and being feeling like I'm like stuck and surrounded by people, none of whom who are getting why I'm so stressed out and why I'm unhappy.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And I feel that that's the other way of of getting out. And but my way of getting out was full of so much pain and anguish as
Hmm.
opposed to hope and opportunity. And I think that's the difference. But I'm really, yeah, it's very curious and very interesting to see how you could find actually so many um, other people, um, and thoughts and ideas. I felt there was just nobody else like around who was saying these things, doing these things.
I know.
There was no, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like, it's really hard to, like, even when we hadn't taken that final decision to move out of
Mm,
this life, but our lifestyle changed drastically. Like, you'd be shocked, Abhinav, the kind of house we had in Singapore.
mm,
My grandmother probably had a more modern house by convenience, and how we were eating, how we were living.
yeah.
So I can totally imagine, like, for most of our friends, and like, and these were the same sort of friends. Like, we, like, an year ago, we were hanging out, drinking, doing the
Mm,
different things together, and almost like 1 2 years, and everything flipped.
yeah.
And for rest of the world, like, you don't find your people, you don't find your tribe. It's madness. It's crazy. Like, what kind of crazy life are you guys living? I can totally imagine like how you have felt. It's yeah.
Yeah. What what do you think is the reason? You mentioned how, we are resigned to bad air, bad water, bad food, and toxic environments. Shouldn't it be very obvious for people that, hey, this is quite bad and quite unfair, and this is not the life that we should live? Why is it that, I mean, I think it has always puzzled me that
Totally.
even my friends who have seen me get
Yeah.
out and do live life differently, I'm sure
Yeah.
there are friends of yours who are still in the cycle and not
Yeah.
yet leaving. Like, what keeps them in is what I wonder.
If you ask me, I can give that just one word answer to that.
Mm,
Patient.
mm,
Strongly, majorly. Like, there'll be multiple factors to it. Like, again, like I mentioned this like a few minutes ago, the conditioning that happens, cultural, familial, educational, social,
yeah,
all of it is feeding into that fears and insecurities. Like, you're made to believe there's scarcity. And
yeah,
that scarcity mindset, when you're running into that race, you ignore everything else. You even, like, to an extent that you're ignoring the basic essence of life, food, water, and air.
yeah.
That scarcity is making us, so blinded in that race.
Mm,
And that scarcity, like, there are multiple factors, but I personally believe education was one big factor for me to get into that rat race, for my
yeah,
parents to push me into this race.
yeah,
Education, which was believed to be that lever, that one,
yeah,
that point, that launch platform is going to set my life right, great, healthy, joyful, but
yeah,
it's otherwise to me. And that's one big reason when we were living this life, we were questioning things, the norm, we were questioning our conditioning. What happened to us? Where did we go wrong?
yeah,
Everything went back to the same conditioning, the fear that is induced into us right from childhood. And that is just added on by every class, first, second grade, 12 years, 14 years of fears. That is in there, and you are kind of built into that robot to believe that's okay to consume. Your water is chlorinated or fluorinated, full of toxins, and your food is, it's okay. But you got to have that mainstream corporate dream. You got to be that VP. You got to be that entrepreneur, build that next, massive startup. Everybody's running after that. And it's purely fear, scarcity, and conditioning to me. I think that's where people get stuck
yeah.
and are unable to see, what's really essential for life.
This is very. I agree with you. I think what I'm, at least for myself, what I discovered was that I was sold the scarcity of the future so that the abundance of my present could be taken away. You know,
Mhm.
uh,
Aptly put, very aptly put. Correct.
like I see that, like, if when a child, like the moment the child starts crawling, is immediately attracted to nature, loves dirt, loves to grab a
True.
stick, loves to, play with leaves.
True.
Um, so there is, and of course, the moment they start growing slightly more, you see that they have very quick affinity for humans, animals, loves building relationships, has an interesting relationship with also things, resources, what we call resources. Is able to imagine a pencil as an aeroplane, and an aeroplane as a truck, and a truck as, is able to play with resources, as opposed to how adults feel very so serious about resources, but children are able to do that, um, and are able to strangely be so much more comfortable with themselves than adults are. And I think that is what schools take advantage of. Like a child is able to be okay with some boredom, be okay with, uh, is not always constantly doubting himself, and so on. So that these systems take advantage of that, make sure that they listen to instruction, keep quiet for hours. Um, they're taking advantage of something very nice about the child. But what I figured is that there are these four relationships with nature, with resources, with community and people. All of these relationships are gradually broken when you send your child to school, put them inside this hot box of education, four wall. And then
Agree.
finally, when all the relationships are broken, then the final relationship that breaks is the relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
And then when you're left with nothing, then the future is sold to you that, hey, you're nothing now. You are zero.
Right.
You have nothing that you've already achieved, and
True.
every achievement is in the future. So go for that.
Exactly, exactly. Like, you need to believe that you work for that future, and then, disconnecting yourself with every essence that was biologically built into your DNA, into your every cell, every hormone of your body is asking you to be wild, be in nature, be in soil, be in mud. Then you condition, believe, and soul that future dream that
Mm.
you will have abundance one day, which doesn't happen, but you will have it. And you keep
Yeah,
running after it. Then that burnout happens at 30, 35, 40, 45 in that corporate level, which we now call midlife crisis. You're trying to fulfill that with so many different things. But at the end of the day, it's the void.
yeah. And I suspect that this for some time I think I used to think that, okay, the schooling system is just badly designed, and therefore it does these things. It is breaking all of these relationships. But then I realized that no, actually, if it did not break these relationships, then we would not become two things. We would not become an ideal consumer, right? We can become an ideal consumer only when we feel that we have nothing with us and
True.
everything needs to be consumed.
Exactly.
We would also not willingly give away clean air, clean water, our forest, land in the forest, the big spaces. We would not
True.
allow that to be taken away. We only can give that away if we have no longer any relationship with them.
So true. So true. So hit the nail on the head. It is that
That's a
actually.
scam, no?
Exactly. I sometimes really do feel and wonder, schools, and it happened to me, and I'm not generalizing for everybody. There might be some exceptions and all, but broadly, we are manufacturing little consumers in school. This is what is happening. You make them designed to consume. You're making them disconnected with the natural world, with their own abilities. If you go to any indigenous community, we've been fortunate to live and spend time with multiple indigenous community, and that's what I say. Like, we are undoing our conditioning with rural indigenous people. That's what we're doing.
Yeah,
Everybody is self-sufficient. They know how to make their own soap, their own food, grow their own food, have their own water. Educate their own child in their own ways, like not with fancy degrees or certificates or any sort of paper thing, but it's happening, and this is how we've flourished with nature, in connection with nature, in communities for thousands of years. It's only in last one or two generations we've forgotten all that wisdom.
yeah,
And how do you make some people consumers and dependent on certain corporations or systems or governments? When you
yeah,
make them disconnected from their own instincts, when you make them incapable of some basic skills, have your own food, water, hair, or whatever those things are, your basic essentials is everything. Like, in today's, like, for any educated person, including myself, when I was living in city, for every little thing, I was dependent on some system.
something to buy for.
Toothbrush to a paste or a soap or a shampoo or my food or my grains and everything. Now, living in this village, the kids know which damn branch is a toothbrush. Like initially for me, like even growing up, like that time we knew a little bit, okay, neem branch is
Mm,
good at tooth, but these guys know like 10 other branches.
yeah.
That's the wisdom. They don't buy brushes and toothpaste. Like this is a very small example in giving of dependence, how dependent. And once you make them consumers, then that's how everybody falls into that trap. They're insufficient and incapable of being self-sufficient. Then they need corporation system, companies, brands coming up to make things for them.
Yeah.
Then you fall into the trap. You're incapable. You need money for those things. For that money, you got to go work. And when you're out in corporates and you're working in corporates or in government or anywhere, when you're working, then you're disconnected. So you've said it very correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard so many times from people that they say, oh, they've whole schooling thing has become a business now. That's why they don't pay attention to educating the child. They don't have skills. But I never found that statement very right. I feel schooling is sure that maybe they make money and all of that, but actually the schooling is a fantastic marketing tool. It prepares the customer to buy things they never thought they wanted to buy.
True. So
Uh,
true, so true. Educate, like it's for one individual, it might just be business, but the impact of that
yeah,
business or that system, that installation is way beyond what we can never imagine.
yeah. It makes sense. I mean, who created these schools? Like, it was not some social change makers or activists or artists who made the schools. Like, it was
Industrialists,
and bankers and
absolutely.
landowners, the ones who were already suppressing people who came.
Totally like it. Like one of the big reasons why schooling system was brought into practice was to support industrialization, to have workforce. Today, that workforce that's evolved schooling system in a different way. They're producing the workforce and also producing the customers.
Yes. Yeah. What a wonderful thing. I mean, so intelligent, no? Like,
It's
can't
brilliant. I
a
think
system that does it so well, creates the people you need to build the product and creates the people who must consume the product, and somehow it's the same people. Yeah.
exactly. Imagine at some point somebody was so damn smart to understand how to move masses, and not just masses of an area, region, demographic across the globe.
Yeah.
It
It is
happened.
it's extremely evil, but very smart. Um, okay, so let's talk a little bit about what happened after you became a parent. And I was seeing one of your videos, and you have this incredible Instagram channel. We'll put a link with the podcast. But I was seeing one of your videos where you're talking about the importance of your child spending time with soil and
Uh,
play. Um, why do you believe that this is where children belong? They belong in the mud. They do not belong in play schools. They
yeah.
belong with insects, and they don't belong with toys that look like, I don't know, animals. This is quite a distance from mainstream parenting, which is increasingly more, consumer based. So yeah.
Really? Yeah, of course. So I'll have to go a step back, like again, before we became parents. So one beautiful thing that happened to us, and again, like we don't want to take the credit for it. We always believe like this: gods, our ancestors, there are energies who are working in our favor, bringing some wisdom to us. We were like nobodies to this world before we became parents, but soul brings its own energies. So we understood this fact, how you were going to raise a child and how you want to raise it. The work actually becomes in the womb, what today people are calling fetal bonding and all of that. It was happening in this culture for ages, when we hear the stories about Abhimanyu and all. So
Mm,
that's when our work started, and we knew like we're gonna raise child not in the typical mainstream way. This is not going to be healthy for him. And I think every instinct of both us, me and Garima, my wife, both of our bodies, our minds, our souls was saying like this is not how things can happen. So even within the womb, Garima's one main point was how much time she can spend with the elements. in soil, in mud, in rain weather, to an extent, like during the second pregnancy, we've totally remained remote away from the medical system in the elements, with the elements, because that's how essential they are. If you go back to reading even some of our own historical, scripts, everything talks about, the work happens in the womb. So with the first child, we kind of realized this intuitively, little bit. We read some researchers, some of our ancient texts,
Mhm.
some bits of facts and facts coming together, and that's how we understood like this is super essential for a child to grow. uh, at the same point when a lot of things were happening within our own life, we realized everything else was artificial, plastically designed, and we were already questioning things. So we knew like we got to stay away from, play schools or, even playrooms or play arenas or games and toys and all of that. So one thing that when the first child was already in the womb, two things that we were very clear of, at least for the first 8 years. And this was something that we understood from Chanakya Niti a little bit. First 8 years for the child, we're not going to care about what he learns. He knows the alphabets or numbers or not, while it did happen organically without us teaching him anything. But the first 8 years, we're going to make sure we connect him with the elements, the nature. That's going to be number one priority for us. The second priority was to make sure he is raised emotionally regulated, so that as an adult, as a 30-year-old, he knows when he's angry, why he's angry. He can voice it out, talk calmly to his peers, his colleagues, or his friends, or his family, why his certain emotions are happening. Those were the two priorities that we had. So I'll get to the emotional part later, but to your point on why he's spending so much time in soil, why does he play so much in soil? It was essential for us because we knew it's going to help with his immunity, with his development. And this was very intuitive back then when we decided we're going to make sure we raise him like that. But with as the journey progressed, he was growing up. We were seeing a lot of benefits. It might sound very, I'm showing off, or I don't mean it in that way, but my son has never been to a doctor, never taken a pill. So that's how wonderfully it works. And it's not something great that I'm doing or just we figure out the magic. This is how all indigenous communities work. This is how we understood with people and staying and living with some of the tribal communities. They don't have doctors and setups around them. There's the magic of nature and its elements that it does. All the great good bacteria, the pollens, everything is working in favor of your body, of your child's body. This is what a child needs to build a strong immunity, to build a strong, healthy physical development, mental development, strength. Nature in its own pace, in its own ways, is teaching everything. And that's why it was super essential for us to make sure like a child is spending a lot of time in soil, in mud, getting dirty. We sometimes use like not a big fan of industries and corporation. Ki daag achhe hain, if you remember that, like one of the detergent brands. So we actually believe we took that quite literally, not just on clothes, but on the whole body. Daag achhe hain. Actually, there's nothing better than having a child in the soil. So that was super essential for us. So yeah, that's why you'll see a lot of, not just a child, including us. We've just not posted some of those videos yet. We spend equal amount of time spending barefoot, earthing on bare, raw forest grounds, like like drenching ourselves in mud and clays of the forest. No, nothing we buy from outside. So again, it's helped drastically for us and particularly for the kid.
This is super. Yeah, there's so many things that you have touched on that I'm confused sometimes which thread to follow on. But what is really popping up for me, the question I think will be a question for a lot of people, that while you were going through this idea of how the child should be born and then how the child should be raised, were you not facing some pushback from relatives, from other families, I know that it is, I mean, there's laws, there are, if you were in Europe, you would have a very hard time doing this because they would
Um,
affect you. And like, so the what is very strange is that the child who does not really belong to himself or to his family, in some ways, the child seems to belong to the state. And that
True.
I think that understanding changed some 400 years ago, where children started being belonging to the state, and so much control was put on,
I know.
from abortions or no abortions, all the way to how do you educate and what kind of services are offered. And how did you deal with? There must have been some pushback, or were you so lucky that there was nobody saying anything against it?
Nah, everyone that lucky. Like we were lucky, and slightly we feel like some people that meant a lot in our lives as well. So there, it was certain, like it was obvious, and we kind of foresaw that, like taking such a big leap against the tide. It was obvious that there had to be some level of pushback. Um, Surprisingly, it wasn't much from our own families, like my immediate family and my wife's immediate family. It was more from some really close friends who were obviously, for all good reasons, were concerned about, why we're doing this for us, and even more so, why you're doing this to your child. Like you're in Singapore, living a great corporate life, you've got everything sorted. Why are you doing this to your child? Like there was again, this kind of fear that was coming to us. Uh, but I think for us, like I'll start with the family first and then go more external, like internally, like how our families took it. Because it wasn't an overnight decision, or neither did it happen in 1 year or 2 years. It was like a journey of a few years. Like I said, it started happening in Bangalore, and we were shifting our life gradually from one thing, from food to air to water to kids to upbringing to parenting. So many things were happening. Our parents were kind of already seeing, we're kind of headed in a certain direction, and things were working out. Initially, when we changed our food, air, and water, our health were getting better. Like, and when we started to raise a child a certain way, they were seeing some benefits of it. And there was also always, when we felt that when you are confident and convinced enough with what you want to do,
Yeah.
there's less pushback that you get from your internal families, because most of the time, at least for us, we've only seen our families question us when they felt like we're uncertain of what we're doing. But we were so certain. We'd read enough researches, papers, ancient texts. We met enough people, unschooled kids or kids who've lived wild and raw, spent time with certain communities who live very raw, or indigenous communities and so on. So parents kind of foresaw this, like this is not uh, an unthoughtful decision from our end, and they've done their due diligence. And both our moms were totally aligned. In fact, to an extent, both our moms are living this life with us, and thankfully,
Yeah.
we reversed some of their health problem living this natural life at the age of 60 and 65. So parents were on board. Dads had their own fears because they're conditioned a certain way. Financials and to provide becomes their, topmost prerogative for life. Like how you're going to live, how you're going to provide for your family, for your own selves. They had their own fears, and to that we had our own answers. Before quitting that mainstream life, we'd worked out on Excel how we're going to live. We were living a very simple and humble life. We'd worked out on our finances, because those fears were not just in our parents. Like, however, we try to say like we've advanced and we've taken this step and we've evolved, but those fears coming from our own insecurities and coming from our own conditioning were always there, even within us. I can speak for myself, at least it was there within me, and they still do come back once in a while. But we worked, sat down, made our own plans, and when we shared those plans and thoughts with our immediate family, everybody was on board. And thankfully, when we made them understand the purpose, and now I'll come to education part. Like initially, this was more on the natural living. They understood the benefit, because most of you go one generation back, most of the parents have lived that life or have seen their parents live that kind of life. So they know the benefits.
Yeah.
Now, coming on the education part, that was a big one. And that too, my mother-in-law spent 40 years in education with Government of India teaching.
Wow.
So she definitely would have, we assume she would have certain point of views and thoughts. But again, you don't put it, like we were very clear, we're not going to put a child, at least the first 6 years, ever to education. We'll go with the flow. We'll see how learning, development, education, our way, education, like in our own way, is going to happen. And the results were beautiful, how we saw our son evolve. And I can very boldly use the term flourish, how he flourished in nature and with the unschooling thought that we had. And parents saw that and they were totally on board for this idea. Externally, again, coming back to the other point, like this was more internal. Internally, we were lucky. The lucky side was internal. And on the external side, some really close friends and families did push their own insecurities and fears onto us. How are you going to do it? What's he going to do
Mm.
without a degree, without this and that? It did trigger some insecurities once in a while, but I think because my wife was very sure, because she'd studied, you know, kids psychology. She is a parent coach herself, and she knew what we were doing, why we're doing it, and we kind of today believe, in future the kids will need more emotional regulation and stability, connect to nature than any skills of jobs of degrees and so forth. So given how the setups of schools or institutions or jobs is happening today in the world, and imagine 20 years from now how the world will be. So we were very clear, my wife was very clear that we really want him to be connected to nature and emotionally regulated. He makes less money, he doesn't have any degree, it doesn't matter to us unless he asks for it at a certain age. We'll be open for that. So that clarity from her, of course, I caught that energy, and that gave me the confidence. Then any sort of pushback and any questions and point of views that we were already getting from a lot of friends and people in our circle, we kind of dealt with it in our own way. It didn't affect our journey and path so much so.
That's amazing. No, I've noticed that my first experience with that was when I quit my job, and even then, it was not even about choosing education, but just quitting my job. Then, and I saw a lot of people, my friends, my family's friends, and my uncles and aunts, people who have not talked to me in a long time, suddenly came to talk to me to
Not
that
out of it.
big mistake I'm making, um, and at that point, I was just so mad and so angry that I was like, I'm just not gonna listen. Uh,
Yeah,
Later, when I calmed down a little bit, I realized why is it that they are saying these things, that in 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 telling me that I'm wrong about my choices, somehow they were justifying their choices. Uh,
absolutely. Yeah,
the parent that they should not take their kid out of school and learn in a different way, they're justifying their decision to keep the child in school, or you know and not acknowledging the fears and the insecurities that they are facing. And
yeah.
I thought that after I show some success, maybe things will change. But then they found another justification, and they said, oh, you are an exceptional person, you are different, you are this
Yeah,
but not all of us are not like that. We are common people, have uh, the stresses of a common person. We cannot leave this system. So congratulations for doing this yourself, but you know that there
it
is,
doesn't happen to everybody.
you are now an example, not an example, sorry, you're not an example, you are a role model or somebody like a very, you've now, you're now at a very far away distance.
Distance. Yeah,
At least while you were in the same system, you were closer.
yeah.
You succeeded going out of the system. Now you are so far away that nobody can emulate you or nobody can do that same thing, because um, you must be special. Otherwise, there is no way for me to live with this idea that I'm making a mistake. You know,
So
um,
true, so true. Yeah.
do you feel this like like your wife is a child psychologist? You have had so many thoughts, and you were surrounded by communities. Do you feel that you need a lot of privilege to be able to step out of mainstream society or mainstream learning and school-based education, that only somebody who has that degree of privilege and that degree of understanding and that much ability to control their own lives are going to be able to step out of these systems? Is that what you and I are becoming examples of? Mm.
Oh, that's a great question. That's one that we really get very often. Like so many people who want to understand our journey. This is one of the big first questions that people, throw out. Like, is this because of your privileges that you're living with? I would answer that with a yes and no. Yes, because yes, for my generation, because if I didn't have this entire journey of this career, saving up to live like this, and then that confidence, I wouldn't have been able to do this, to be very frank. Like if, but no, it comes to the next generation because if I'm privileged that ways, so that's where we've got to be the cycle breakers for the next generation. My parents weren't that privileged. They did not have those tools. They did not have the exposure. They did not have, the tools like internet, online learning today. What we have, tons of opportunities.
Yeah.
My parents did not have that. So that's totally fair. Like maybe we were privileged to be in this generation, these times, to take certain calls for our life the way we've taken. And I strongly feel like a lot of parents need to be thinking that way to be those cycle breakers. Because why are we pushing the same fears and insecurities to the next generation when the reality and environment has changed entirely and drastically? Like it's not even close to being same. So that's on one part. Secondly, privileges from a point of view where one question that we get very often, the financial. Uh,
Mm.
so people feel like these guys might be loaded, and it's okay to take this call if things don't work out. They'll go back. They'll have tons of a few hundred crores or whatever people are thinking. I came from a very, 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 very humble background. I cannot even call myself like middle-ish. It was like probably upper lower-ish kind of background. So that privilege was not there. I studied most of my education. Half my career I was paying back loans,
Wow.
which I took for my education or otherwise with this and that. To a point where when we took this decision, my parents were totally dependent on us when we decided to quit mainstream. And we took those decisions. So I would say when I said yes and no, to an extent, yes, these kind of, those privileges of being financially independent, which eventually we built because career worked in our favor, God was kind to us. But we were not born with those privileges.
Mm.
So it's not necessarily, and having lived this journey now. So this is an answer I would have given. I'm giving you from a perspective of 2, 3 years ago, like when we didn't start this and living this journey now. I can say this with 100% confidence. You do not really have to be extremely privileged. I think majority of the parents in urban cities, people who are working a decent job, I'm not saying decently paying, just a decent job where they can make ends meet. They have that exposure of today's modern education. I think they are privileged enough to take this call because it's more of a mindset shift. It's this decision happened from mindset, not from financials or privileges or certain accolades and acknowledgements that we have from our whole life journey. It was more mindset, Abhijit, to be honest.
Yeah, I feel that we use these, that undoubtedly having these privileges make it probably easier and help, but
Totally.
also not use it as a way to never make a decision at all. Like that
Correct.
goalpost so far that you can live with in the comfort of never achieving it, but
Yes.
never really happen. One of the things we say in our, like at DeFi, um, we create these learning spaces and we create them in the most difficult communities, in the most marginalized places, in refugee camps, slums, villages.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people misunderstood the reason we do that. Everybody thought that, oh, because there is poverty and because these kids need, you know, because, oh, it's India and African countries, and it's, yeah, life is tough, so we are creating these spaces there. But the honest truth is, no, that's not why. Sure, life is tough.
Yeah.
Or a space like a Nook will help in creating opportunities for themselves. But the reason we created the Nooks in these places was because they were actually far better at taking risks and choosing
Uh,
alternates than I ever saw people with privileges be able to do that. In fact, the more privileges they had, the more struggle they had in like letting go. Um, Whereas a
correct.
child in the village was not going to a school, or bunking a class or whatever, and nobody batted an eye, nobody complained to anybody. And
Correct, correct. We like most privileged, most educated people I've come across have most scarcity mindset, most fears, most insecurities. The ability to take a risk is least. You're so right. You're so right.
I feel that somehow the world of capitalism has figured out a way to keep the middle class, kind of like in a contained chicken coop, where you can because the ones who are super rich also do not believe in sending their kids to school,
Yeah,
and the ones who are living in difficulties also are not fully aligned with the system. The ones who are very much bought into the system.
yeah.
Yes. And that's why you see that most of the alternates either lie, I mean, most of the alternate schools, the Summerhill, Sudbury, and all of them,
Hmm.
great schools, but are with like people who are at the very top of that pyramid.
Yeah.
But in the middle class, you rarely see these things. In the middle class, you see, okay, take something from the alternate, take like a maker space, or take the peer learning, or take these terms and make it a little feature of a regular school. And then
Correct.
everybody believe that we are changing, but they're not. It's just okay. We have added horse riding to our school, but that doesn't change really who we are and how we prosper.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, because the fear is so much, they want the same patterns and same traditions for ourselves and for and our kids. We don't want them to change, but how are we going to justify like we've evolved? That evolution comes in adding in those layers, some icing here and there, adding some certain fancy classes, or nature walks or forest schools. Certain fancy schools today have forest walks. The
Yeah.
kids in forest walks, they're going and using tons of paper to write and make charts about what they saw in forest. So you see the disconnect there. Like it's again like you so rightly putting it together. Like this is how the system is designed to keep the middle class probably stuck within the same pattern because that's the major chunk of population of this planet.
Yeah, I place my faith on people who don't have much. I think they are the ones who will break through. And I mean, look at history, right? Like all the big systems changes. Like I feel revolution belongs to the poor. It never has belonged to the middle class or upper middle class. Like it's only from there where somebody, where a large number of people start believing that okay, we are done. Like this is just enough.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm constantly battling this thing that okay, i- is who's going to change this reality, right? Who is it? Is it organizations? Is it the government? Is it policymakers? Is it rich people? Is it middle class people? Is it the people from the margins of society? Is it the 70% or 50% who are living in extremely difficult conditions? And I feel that the who's the most motivated is the one who's getting the worst end of the
yeah,
stick and has very little allegiance to that system.
absolutely, absolutely. I agree. I totally agree on that.
The you mentioned I love the you were talking about the emotional regulation, and that immediately triggered this thought in me where I've always the way I grew up, I think, was that I never really learned to be happy alone, and I never learned to be sad together. Like, if I was unhappy, it was just for myself and not to tell anybody. And if I was happy, then I had to celebrate in order to know that I am happy. So, unless 50 people know about my happiness, it's not happiness at
It's
all.
not happiness. Yeah.
Um, Now I saw also your video on obedience and how you feel that the that you don't want to teach your child to be obedient to you. You want to do something else. So can you talk a little bit about this? What is this sort of emotional regulation? What are you looking for, or what direction are you going towards with your child and in your way of parenting?
Yeah, totally. So, this is one thing that we personally, as parents, both of us have struggled a lot. Like, while we may have achieved the so-called milestones of, a good evolving life as per the mainstream standards, but, if every couple has their own ups and downs, fights and all, like, it was a blackout of how to express my emotions. It was how to sort things out, how to manage angers, how to share and reflect love that I care about you. or not just towards my wife, even towards my parents or my brother or even a friend. There were these like very silly ways of doing it, to pulling one another's leg, in a very meaningful way, which might appear mean, but that's how I used to express my love towards my wife. And it felt like this is certainly off. And again, all of this again triggered when we became parents, because we were very sure that we got to be more conscious. Like parenting, one thing that triggered was like we have to rethink, and we have to relearn and unlearn our way of living and our patterns of emotions, ex- except for some good ones if there were any, which we do not know yet. We definitely have to make sure like this kid has to grow up and be an emotionally regulated adult, because fortunately, even in my role in my job, I had exposure to seeing some of the digital transformation work and how life is changing. We had many friends who had kids 7, 8, 10, 12, 13, and we've seen the kind of emotional irregularities that kids have. they would
Mm,
they were immediately shut down the moment certain emotion, particularly negative emotions. Crying
mm,
was bad, anger was bad, and people started to see, if he's angry now, he's going to grow up like an
un-
extremely crazy angry person. He's going to have anger issues. That's how we immediately tag an emotion, and we were seeing that very frequently on people
yeah,
around us, some kids being raised that ways. And fortunately, because when we were already thinking so many thoughts were going in a different direction about parenting or schooling. So Garima, that's when she became parent, and she quit a corporate job, and she started to study kids' emotions and kids' psychology with a mentor who was based in US. She's a Pakistani American doing beautiful work on trauma. So she started and she's also an unschooled psychologist, so-called. I don't know if there's a term of unschooled psychologist, but it was more coming out of passion, and we were living and creating that for ourselves so that we can pass that to our kid. Unschooling happened for us first, then for our child. So we understood emotions very beautifully through those workshops, through the time she spent with her mentor, and then I did a workshop with her, and we spent some beautiful time understanding emotion and traumas for her, and it became absolutely crystal. I think one of the few things that we were very clear, even for unschooling, like we were saying, we'll go with the flow, we'll understand. For taking this leap of faith, there were question and fear, but this thing hit us right into our hearts and mind. Like this is one thing we cannot compromise upon: emotional regulation. So, like I said, like I was working, I had exposure to some digital work transformation that were happening, and most of the corporation again target their long-term strategy on younger kids.
yeah,
And that's how I understand how the digital world is going to shape up in the future. And we've already seen examples of AIs coming in, tablets, and kids addicted to screens. How ADHD is such a common thing all of a sudden in the last 10 years, even not even 10 years, probably 5 or 6 years. And we understood like it doesn't matter like how much he earns, what career, what path he chooses for life, but he has to be an emotionally regulated adult. At 30-year-old, he needs to understand his emotions, because if he knows that, the way we are seeing future, me and my wife, this is our hypothesis, and it's our own educated guess, the world's going to be from an emotional stability point of view. And you can see that happening in schools. In Western countries, it's even worse, if you ask me. India is still a little untouched from that nuances, but it's coming here. The more urbanized, the more civilized we call it, the more emotionally regulated anxiety and depressions and kids going to counseling is increasing. We knew like one thing we got to make him is an happy adult. And happiness, we realized that in our life, happiness has very less to do with money and the so-called stability norms and all of that. So that's where emotional regulation came on. And for first 8 years, one thing we promised ourselves, we will not care if he doesn't know a single alphabet, a single number. He doesn't know English or any other language. He's learning fine. He's learned a lot of it without us teaching. That's different, but we will find first 8 years will only work on emotional regulation till the age of 3 or 4, when our son did not know how to say A, B, C, D, A for apple, B for bat. He didn't know nothing, but he knew that I'm angry and please give me time. So that was the priority, and that's how emotional regularity came into our lives, and we got super crazy about it and like super like strong promoters of emotional regulation in kids. Yeah, if
Yeah.
that's because if that's not there, like we blame like how the society is today, and it's us who make the society. It's us who make the cultures. I believe raising a child is not just about raising your kid. It's that one adult who's going to make tomorrow's society.
Yeah.
If they're not regulated, why do you think the wars and craziness and corporation and poisoning and toxification, everything is happening? Because of some level of ego or insecurity that we all were running after. This is how we see it and we saw it, and that's how we made it a priority for our parenting.
It's amazing. I loved how that you mentioned that you had to go through a lot of unschooling first before you decided on unschooling your kid, and probably your child never really needed unschooling because he was never schooling in the first place. But but we have already gone through so much of schooling, even after going to a school, even after finishing school time and university time, and there's still so much schooling going on
Exactly.
in our lives. But the isn't it the challenging thing? And you've touched upon it, but and I think this will be the last bit that I wanna get into. But the when you're when you're stepping out or stepping into the world of unschooling and moving out from mainstreams into an alternative world, it's almost like you're not changing one or two things because that doesn't work. It doesn't work that you buy, organic mangoes, but then, the rest of it is still, you're still part of the toxic food system. Doesn't really change much. So
Yeah.
you have to really start playing a different game altogether. You're not just
Yeah.
changing a few things in the game that it is. But stepping out of that system, for example, means stepping out of a system that believes that literacy and numeracy are the first essential things to teach a child as opposed to emotional regulation or connection with nature. That is the mindset or the belief system that mainstream currently operates with. If you ask me, most organizations I know in the nonprofit space are also entirely focused on building literacy and numeracy as the primary goal and the way to achieve getting out of poverty and fulfillment for a child. Um, how do you leave that and go into a world where no, where you can tell yourself that no, it will not be these things for my child. Literacy and numeracy will come with time, with when needs arise, he will pick it up. Um, certificates will not matter if he desires to have them, then they can. But that you would not go with this idea that hey, that's what is called success.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
great question.
yeah. How do you
So
how do you leave this one system, go into another system? It doesn't scare you, it doesn't bother you.
it doesn't scare for sure. In fact, it feels very liberated. And I don't want to flaunt it, but it does feel very liberated because most of the parents that I've seen who send their kids to the mainstream system, and again, we never have any judgment of people why they're sending their kids because unschooling it takes a lot. Definitely, it takes a lot of work because what a system designed with so much of money put into it, people getting trained for it, you got to do that and more and again against the tide by all by yourself. So it takes a lot. So it's all fine if anybody chooses that. But for us, it was very clear and didn't scare us. Literally, why I'm just sharing it, it felt more liberated. Uh, because there are most of the struggles in our peers we heard of parents was around schooling. When the kid doesn't go to school, which school? The certain aspirational school he didn't get through there. Okay, I need to connect to certain resources, certain people that I know, people in position of power who can influence or get people into once they're into schooling. Oh, this is super expensive. Like I went to a very decent school, fortunately, but the fee structure was very nominal back then. Very nominal. And it was a nice, a fancy old hill station Catholic school. But I was shocked to hear some of the schooling system fees that was somebody in the family was once explaining, and they live in Gurgaon, living a nice fancy corporate life, and they've got one daughter and the other two who were born they were twins, so three kids in total, close to 18 lakhs a year everything in education and around education.
Crazy.
To spend that amount, you have to work your asses off. Imagine.
Yeah. And spend time with
I'm
your
saying
kids.
we're all stuck. So in fact, the worries and the scary part is probably when you're sending kids to school for us, from our perspective. Again, not generalizing for anybody. This everything I'm sharing from our lens. So I think there was no scare as such. Like the stress is much lesser. And it's even more beautiful because the kid is learning at their own part. I think at the beginning of the conversation, you touched upon it. Kids are born mindful. Every cell in their body, it's born to grasp. Like you would know very basic, simple fact. Kids have, I don't know how much X more neurons than an adult. If we are seeing this much, they're observing and absorbing that much how their evolving, developing brain can grasp. So without us teaching our kid anything, he was still learning numbers, he was still learning alphabets. He learned math, basic addition, subtraction, very basic multiplication all by himself. And we are surprised, and it might come as a shock. We're still surprised. Where did he learn from? We understood numbers he learned from lift, the elevators that we used to take. And learning certain numbers he learned from the bus numbers we used to take back in Singapore. The first alphabet he learned was H because I drive a Honda car. That's how crazy. Some of the first few words he learned to read weren't cat, bat, tat,
Yeah.
those easy words. It was Germany. My brother lives there. But from the sound of it, we were speaking or it was Joe and he connected dots. Somehow he was just learning. And that's how kids are mindful. That's how kids are born. It's their natural ability to
Yeah.
absorb everything that's happening around them, including maths, including alphabets, including numbers. You don't have to teach them. Yeah, they might not learn it in A, B, C, D. He might learn H and then B and then D and then D and then E in that order. But that's fine. How does it matter if you learned A, B, C, D, A to Z, or you learn from Z to A, or learn in A order? So all these things, while that was happening, it didn't scare us, and which is why I say it felt liberated because the child, without us teaching, while our priority till 8 years, and we've never taught him even to read or write. He's learned some words, some reading, very basic. He doesn't know still. He cannot read a book by himself, and we're fine with that. So initially, I think we as parents have to be at peace.
Yeah.
Like this is fine. Slowness is okay. So we got okay with that slowness first, and that's where our unschooling comes first. We unschool ourselves. That pace is okay if he learns to read at 12 or 15 or 18. But we're very sure, as an 18 or 20-year-old, he won't be a person who doesn't know how to read or write. That much we're very sure of.
Yes.
Either we teach him or the world teaches him. He will learn it. He's that smart, or not that any kid is that smart.
Yes.
When you leave them, they learn the most. And this was initially just our thought. And as we progress on our journey, we read so many researches. Now there are papers, or even from Harvard. Kids
Yeah.
learn the most when they're doing crazy, mad play outdoors.
Yes.
So now it's even like verified with certain researches and all, like from the so-called academic, excellent center of excellences. So not that that influence us, but it's now justified for people who still seek that validation. So all this was happening very, very organically. We were seeing those changes in ourselves, in our kid. He was grasping learning just fine, just in his own order, in his own structure. There was no curriculum. There still is no curriculum. There's no routine, but at his own pace, by his own interest, very intrinsically motivated, very curiosity,
Yeah.
driven by curiosity. It's not pushed by me or my wife or anybody.
I
So
love it.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's how it's happening. So yeah. So that all of this is making every day is learning for us. It makes our lives easier and makes us even more confident. It makes our thought even more validated. Like whatever decision we took and we were taking back then, it was getting validated immediately because we took it as a pilot project because we were very new to so-called unschooling. So unschooling again is a very fancy term. We just call it life.
Yeah.
It's life. He's learning basic skills.
Yeah.
How does it matter? He's not seeing goat on a paper and then learning to go to he goes with goat shepherd kids of the village every day. He's learning goat, how to milk a goat, how what kind of shit goat does when he or like the goat eats a certain shrubs or certain like everything, like they're living it day in day out. So I don't need to introduce any structure, any school to it. because learning is happening beautiful. And at the contrary, when I heard the traumas parents, when we heard the traumas parents were facing, sending their kids to school and centering their life and their entire financial plan for their next 30 years around not the child, around the school. But the life has to be around child, right? It has to be around the family. But the life was everything around career and money for all obvious reasons. So all of
Mm.
this happened parallelly and gave us, clarity on what we were doing and why we were doing.
I find it really, really, uh, the what I used to before I started DeFi, I was dabbling with AI, and um, what is very funny about the world we live in is we are as a society we have become a strong proponent of AI, and we are very happy and okay with the idea that nobody really knows. You can't really control how the AI learns, like how a neural network works. You don't really control that, and you don't try to, and you are okay with that. You are okay with a machine learning the way it will learn, and
Yeah,
you're okay with, you know, just sharing with it whatever data you can share, and leaving it in environments that it can absorb from, and then you're happy to be surprised by what that machine can produce. But when it comes to a human child, we want to know everything, exactly how he's going to be taught, exactly what he is learning. And we want to measure every time he has learned something. We have to test it. We don't do this with anything else. Mind you, like, and I find it also very interesting that education seems to be the only product, if you can call it a product, but it seems to be the only product where the user is constantly tested. Nothing else, nowhere else you do that. And um,
so
but
true. That's so true. That's so true. Like I've never thought it from that frame, but education is actually the only system where the user is being tested, not the product.
not the product, not the
That is true, and not just AI. You look, everything around nature has run, functioned fine, evolved. In fact, from the time we've claimed to be more civilized and more educated, this planet's been the worst.
yeah. We're trying to create and trying to create machines that can experience more and more freedom, and humans that can experience lesser and lesser freedom.
Less of freedom.
I am not
That's
able to
crazy.
reconcile these two realities, and
That is crazy. I know.
quite morbid to think about that. But yeah, I think you're such a beautiful example of letting go and leave. Uh, I think somewhere the success of this begins when you stop trying to measure it. You stop trying to
Okay.
find exactly, does your child know how to construct a three-letter word, and stop trying to look so deeply into him, and start enabling him to be able to absorb and manage the freedom that humanity brings for you.
I agree.
Aditya, this is such a wild and wonderful conversation. Rachit has been telling me that the time is way past, and it's such a struggle to stop. But thank you so much for sharing this. I hope you'll be okay if people reach out to you, and
Yeah,
yeah, asking for questions, and
totally.
because yeah, this is personal. It is not so personal when it's an organization, but when it is a parent,
Yeah.
it's a very
No, but
personal.
we've always been open, like we truly believe this journey hasn't been ours. Like I said, like we were typical mainstream people. Like something happened, it flipped, and it cannot be just our wisdom. It has come a long way from the universe, the cosmos, consciousness, gods, ancestors, whatever you might call it. But we believe in that way. It's not ours. Whatever journey and learning we've shared, it's us for us to share with as many people as we want, and we're always open for anybody to reach at any point of time to us.
We will share also your Instagram channel.
Sure.
I find personally amazing, really, really amazing.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Aditya.
Great. Thank you so much, Abhijit. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody who's watched this, who's listened to it. Um, yeah, we will hopefully create another season of Unheard if we feel like it. No, we don't know. Maybe it's always a maybe. It's not
Yeah.
a So we'll see. But it is so nice to close it. Oh, hey, finally we have the
Most
hi.
greatness.
Thank you so much for coming in the yeah. He's just put the face to the this idea of the child that we were discussing. So nice. Okay, we stop here now.
Sure.
Push is
Thank you, Abhijit.
thank you so much.